Hello, thank you for joining us. I have the privilege of introducing Dr. Biscoe, and she made a mistake today. Since her full bio is in the book on page 9, if anyone wants to see it, she said, you can just say what you want. Very, very dangerous thing to do. In addition to what's in her bio, what I would like for everyone here to know is that she is a true Renaissance woman. She can do just about anything. She's an entrepreneur. She's one of the country's very top grant writer, gets multi-million-dollar grants on a regular basis competing against large corporations. She also sees connections where other people don't. As she meets you and you tell her a little bit about what you do, she's got this little special spot in her brain where she just stores all that like squirrels store nuts during the winter. And then when something else comes along, she thinks, oh, that could work with that, and we could do this, and I'm going to bring all these people together, and all of a sudden you have this big grant go out the door. She is an amazing woman who really can do just about anything, and she's an incredible resource to us. So I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Belinda Biscoe.
Thank you, Julie, for that very, very sweet, generous introduction. When I hear introductions like that, I want to say, oh my goodness, will the real Belinda Biscoe please stand up? But thank you all for being here. I am very, very excited about this panel that we have convened to talk about issues of diversity and inclusiveness. And so I want to welcome you to this panel. Just to set a little bit of context, I want to share just a little bit. I think we all know and recognize the value that diversity brings to our workplace and to higher education. I think it's also widely known that we are not preparing enough workers to meet the labor demands for our country in the future. So given this fact, institutions of higher education as well as private and public organizations have heightened interest, as we all know, in recruiting and retaining more ethnically and racially diverse students to prepare them for jobs and careers in the future. We also know that there are similar challenges when we look at recruitment and retention that especially majority white institutions of higher ed deal with when they also seek to recruit and retain minority faculty, staff, and administrators. Now, many of you may know that according to the U.S. Census Bureau, by the year 2050, they are projecting that approximately 50% of the U.S. population will be minorities. One of the challenges as we look at these changing demographics is that this increase is also accompanied in many of our states by recent declines of minority student enrollments on our campuses. And so these are just a few of the challenges we continue to face in the 21st century. Our panelists this afternoon will share their insights into topics such as recruitment of diverse faculty, staff, students, and administrators. They'll talk a little bit about mentorship, campus climate, and the involvement of diverse groups in research and STEM areas. So it's going to be really interesting. What I'd like to do now is introduce this very wonderful group of panelists that we have here, and then I'll share with you how we will conduct the panel. It'll be a little bit different probably than what you're typically used to, but I think it will be more engaging, and then we want to allow some opportunities for audience participation and engagement. So my first guest here is Dr. John Armendariz, and he currently serves as Northeastern's Vice Provost of Institutional Diversity and Inclusion. With experience in government, healthcare, the nonprofit sector, and higher education, He brings a deep knowledge of working within an organization to engage stakeholders and enhance a culture that welcomes and includes a diversity of backgrounds and perspectives. He previously served as Associate Director of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at Yale University, where he directed diversity programming aimed at creating an organizational culture of inclusion. John also consulted with senior leadership and academic departments to advance and align diversity efforts on campus. Additionally, he has worked in diversity leadership roles at organizations that I'm sure most of you are familiar with: Planned Parenthood, Federation of America, the University of Texas, MD Anderson Cancer Center, and the Texas Department of Health. Now, people who know me know that one of the things I like to do when I introduce people is also find out a little tidbit about them that you wouldn't find on their resumes, because that really tells us, I think, who they are. So I want to share just a little tidbit about Dr. Armendariz that you would not know from his resume. First of all, he's not a first-generation college student. In fact, he's a college brat. His dad was a professor in urban studies and social work, and he actually learned to play pool tagging along with his dad and hanging out in campus bars. And so he brings not only an interesting professional background to the table, but just an interesting personal background. His dad actually had 7 degrees and was the first person in his family to receive a college degree. So welcome. We're so happy to have you here. So I want to introduce Dr. Jane Arungu to you. She is currently the executive director at the University of Oklahoma for the Southwest Center for Human Relations Studies, and she is under our umbrella of outreach and continuing education. She is also the director of our premier conference at the University of Oklahoma, NCORE. Many of you may have heard of that, the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity in American Higher Education, which draws more than 3,000 participants each year, and we have more than 1,000 higher education institutions there that are represented at this conference. Before joining the University of Oklahoma in August of 2017, so she is a very new Okie, Dr. Arungu worked in various leadership and management roles at the University of Oregon. Her portfolio included oversight of programs for historically underserved and underrepresented first-generation students, faculty, and staff. She also had a focus in that role on leadership development and training, with a focus on administration, diversity. She focused on community outreach, pipeline programs, social justice initiatives, and post-graduation success. And so we have been very, very happy to have Dr. Arungu join us. A bit of trivia about her, and I have to tell you, I love sharing Jane's story because it's powerful, it's interesting, and it helps us to know what a resilient woman she is. Dr. Arungu is originally from Kenya. She grew up in a very rural community in Kenya, and during the time that she was growing up, girls were only allowed to attend grammar school. Well, Jane is the oldest of 12 in her family, and after the 6th child was a girl, her dad decided, maybe I better start educating these girls because it doesn't appear that I am going to have a son. And so on that sixth birth, he decided that his girls better be educated. So Dr. Arungu was actually the first girl in her rural Kenyan community who went to high school and who graduated college. It was such a big to-do that the community actually leased buses to go to her graduation from high school and college. So we are especially pleased to have Dr. Arungu join us on this panel. Thank you, Jane, for being here. And then our last panelist is Dr. Chris Cullinan. Dr. Chris Clifford Cullinan is the founder of ALIVE, which stands for Actual Leadership and Vital Equity. Formally begun in 2014, ALIVE is a coalition of faculty and administrators who are dedicated to and experienced in designing and implementing practical strategies that actually increase equity and inclusion on campuses. Chris served as assistant professor and associate director of organizational development and training at the University of Oregon from 1991 until her retirement in 2014. She currently serves as the co-chair of our National Advisory Council for the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity in Higher Education. Chris has been a teacher, a curriculum designer, an organizational consultant, and all of this since 1972, where she did this work for federal, states, and state and local governments and educational institutions. She has done this work in more than 35 states, and she's also done this work internationally. She has led seminars and taught classes for faculty, administrators, students, and other professionals. And her big goal is to help build culturally competent leadership. She is known for the development of practical strategies for increasing equity and recognizing and eliminating structures, policies, and practices that support institutionalized privilege. So when I think of a tidbit that I want to share about Chris, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is that when I think about Chris and her work in social justice, her first name is Trouble, her middle name is Trouble, and her last name is Trouble, Trouble, Trouble. Chris is one of these people who doesn't mind taking on the difficult things in life around social justice that most mere mortals would run from. She has worked with all kinds of institutions of higher education, from flagship universities to community colleges to colleges. She has also worked a lot in common education. So when I want to take on something that I think is going to require someone to work with me who's got a really tough skin and is also very resilient, Chris is my go-to person. So Dr. Cullinan, welcome, and we're happy to have you. Let's give our panelists a hand. So I've prepared with our planning committee some questions which I will fill with the panelists, and then I'm going to sit down. But we're going to use a process where I set just a little bit of context prior to asking the question, and then we will have the panelists give maybe a couple of minutes of response to questions that they want to jump in, and some questions will be directed directly to panelists. And then after that, we're going to open the floor up for just conversations, questions, and interactions, you, the audience, with our panelists. We hope you will find it engaging, and write your questions down as they maybe say things that spark or trigger interests or thoughts for you. So with the first question, I want to lay a little bit of context around advocacy. Most of us know that advocacy for policy and practice changes regarding diversity and inclusion on campuses across the nation is a growing trend. often our students are the first to advocate, followed by faculty and staff. In some cases, it is a response to an event. Advocacy ranges from campus protests to petitions to letters to the editor, followed by campus awareness and policy shifts through campus groups into the administration. It may mean new classes or courses, groups and organizations, or, as many of us know, it may become a campus or system-wide initiative. So the first question I want to put out to our panelists is this: how do or did you advocate for diversity and inclusion in your institutions? And why don't we start with Dr. Armendariz?
So I've been advocating, so I share with folks the first meeting I ever had was with the president of my institution, and he came to my office, which is rare, because usually you go to see the president. And we had a long conversation. One of the things he shared with me is I want people to come to complain to you, not to me. And out of that conversation, I shared with him, well, we have some challenges here at the institution, and there's some things that we need to work on. And so one of the things that I did was I crafted for my office a strategic plan, but I also crafted one for the institution. And I was asked to present both to the senior leadership team. And it was an interesting experience because later on I was told I shouldn't argue with the president, and that's usually the death knell for your job when you do that. But part of that conversation was the advocacy, that they had some myths and perceptions about the campus climate and diversity on campus that they needed to be made aware of were not accurate. From, Northeastern has students from 144 different countries. We're number 6 in the nation with students from international backgrounds. And yet it's not uncommon to see students clustered by their country together, not hanging out with each other. And so those are obvious to administrators and staff who wander the campus and faculty as well, but less obvious to senior administrators who are in the office. So what I had to do was make them understand some of the areas where we were deficient, some of the myths they had about how diversity was unfolding on our campus, what students were feeling, what the numbers looked like. It was very easy to get caught up in the Northeastern campus is diverse. Look at all the international students, but that's not the same as domestic unrepresented students, women in STEM, and other areas where we're underrepresented. So a lot of what I had to do was do the background research, talk to stakeholders, and present to the senior leadership team, here are the facts. Here are the things that you might not be conscious of that we need to start to address.
So I think for me, and I have said this many, many times, that for me education is a transformative experience, not only because it changed my life, but it also changed my family's life and my community's life. So for me, education is not taken for granted, and I'm very, very passionate about student success. So having been a high school teacher, a high school principal, working in higher ed now for the last 20 years, for me it's what students bring on campus. So we need to think about diversity in the sense of who else should be in this institution. Not only those who are able to come because they can afford it, but also who are not able to come because they cannot afford it. So I have advocated for pipeline programs, going to K through 12 and figuring out who has been isolated because somebody has labeled them as not college material. I was never college material. I would never have afforded college and if my government never gave us grants. But we need to understand that there is willingness from lots of populations to go to college, but sometimes they don't know the path, and it's up to us to outreach and create those pipelines. But also for me, in my institution, my last institution, which is 2 hours away from here, is also advocating and making people understand what do they bring to the table in terms of what do we learn from each other. Growing up in rural Kenya, when I was able to get close to a white person, I touched the hair because that looked really strange to me because I didn't know. And then I interacted, and then I came here, and I, have white friends, and now it's not a myth or a mystery to me anymore because we learn and interact with each other. When you bring a student community that's diverse, you are actually enriching your campus. We may not all be similar, we'll never be similar, and I say it's not about assimilation, it's about integration. You provide your students with such rich knowledge about the world that when they go out there, they don't, seem like deer in the headlights when they are put in a diverse environment to work. So I have advocated for recruitment of a diverse student body. But then I'm also a very strong advocate of removing barriers because we know college is expensive. Having put through 2 young women in college, it cleans you up totally. But for some, there is even nothing to clean up. They don't have anything. So how do we provide financial grants, financial aids? I was just telling Dr. Bisco and Chris that last year at U of O, I created a textbook program where you can come and actually we'll buy you the textbook, go use the textbook, then bring it to us and we keep it in our library. Because there are some kids, even a textbook, it's a big deal. Their mothers, you all are in adult education continuing ed. There is a mother who is wondering, do I buy a textbook or do I buy milk? So we have to think about that. Do I buy a bus pass or do I buy something for my child? So it's about removing barriers. So for me, diversity is not just about let's mix the colors. It's also about let's provide opportunities. Let's provide some equity. Let's go out there, find out why don't we have a diverse body in our institutions, and going the extra mile. We used to go to reservations here in Oregon because most of the natives live in reservations. So what is it we can do for them to get them out of the reservations to the institutions so that they can change their communities in 2050 so that they'll be represented, so that you all don't have to worry about anything, because as you educate people, you are actually improving your quality of life. It's about you too.
So I think advocacy is interesting because I travel around the country a lot and get brought in to talk about stuff that people that are already in the institution have been talking about all along. And yet they bring me in as a white woman to talk about the same stuff. And I think that this raises some very interesting questions about equity and advocacy. One of them is who gets to talk in your institution, who's at the table, and who gets believed. One of the ways that we communicate to those that are less, to our minority or underserved faculty and administrators that they're not really worth it, is they don't get to tell their own story. When they speak up and say something, somebody else translates it for them. Or they're not even at the table, other people speak for them. And so I think when we're talking about advocacy, the first question that I have is, who's already on your campus that's already dedicated to doing this work, and are you listening to them? Are you listening to them when they talk about the barriers for faculty? Are you listening to them when they talk about the barriers to staff and administrators? Are you listening to them when they talk about the barriers for students? This is where community involvement and family involvement is important. But 9 times out of 10, I find out they're incredibly dedicated, very smart people that are culturally competent on campus, and they're being silenced, they're not being included at the table. And the institution not only misses out on the opportunity to change and become a 21st century institution, but this cuts the heart out of people who are dedicated to the institution.
Great responses. So John, I want to kind of throw the next question your way. I understand that you were recognized recently with the Higher Education Excellence in Diversity Award at Northeastern, and that this was given by Insight into Diversity magazine. What can others learn and replicate from your experience at Northeastern?
Sure. We've actually won that award 2 years in a row, and we're the only private university of all of New England to win that award. And so one thing I would encourage people to do, when I was at Yale, I would usually look at magazines and awards and see things that perplexed me. Like, why did they get that award? We have better numbers than they do. We do a better job. And so a lot of it is people don't make the effort to apply. They don't become aware of what are the awards that your programs or your institutions might be eligible for, even if they're outside higher ed. When I was at Yale, Yale was on Working Women's Magazine's top 100 places for working women. It was a finalist for an award for Out and Equal, which is a corporate-focused LGBTQ group. So we went after awards, and so at Northeastern we took the similar approach, because if you think about it, many of us look at some of the branding that goes with awards. We put U.S. News and World Reports, our rankings on our website, and things like that. We shop, we eat out, we look at things that give us an insight that this place might be doing something well. And so in the awards, what you have to realize is that, A, you have to get buy-in from the top, because this award does require you to get some data from the senior leadership team, the president, and the board of trustees about their personal diversity. And that is not kept at all institutions. At our institution, they vetted all the answers, so the senior leadership team, we filled out the survey with the help of multiple entities across campus, but they vetted the answers, because they wanted to see what we were putting that other people were going to read and judge. And so awards like that look at, one of the things that often dissuades some people from going after some of those awards is they think about the numbers only. But the HEAT Award looks at the totality of your efforts. So our numbers are not great. They're better than they are when I first got there. In some areas we've made tremendous strides for diversity. In others, we're moving along at too slow of a pace. But if you look at the sum total of the programs that we do on our campus to support the diversity on our campus, to work in the community, we're doing a lot. And that's what that award recognizes. So I would encourage you to look at what are you doing, who can you partner with, how do you start to share that information. It can be very difficult to collect across college campuses. And then will your senior leadership support going after those type of awards? Some universities, I will share really quickly, are reluctant because they don't want to lose. So we just recently submitted for Campus Pride, which recognizes universities for their support of LGBTQ student community. And it took me 4 years of trying to make the case, because there was a reluctance, well, what if we don't rank high? Well, that's a means to look at where we didn't do well on that rating system, and then come back and look at what can we change, so that the next year when we apply, we do even better.
Great, thank you. Jane, I want to throw a question your way now. Many of you know that our university, University of Oklahoma, was in the national news a few years ago because of an incident with a young fraternity boy who said some very racially inappropriate, saying a culturally inappropriate chant on a fraternity bus party. One of the students on the bus with him took a video of it, and the next thing we knew, it was on YouTube, and many of you know the rest of the story. There have been, out of that kind of very sad incident, some good things to happen. One of those is that our president has now mandated that every freshman student and incoming new student at the University of Oklahoma take a mandatory freshman diversity experience course. Our department that Jane now directs developed a curriculum that all of these students are required to take before they begin their freshman year, or if they're a new student. The question for you, Jane, is how does the University of Oklahoma's freshman diversity experience, which is now required, help support and promote an inclusive environment where students learn perspective taking through intergroup dialogue?
So I want to acknowledge that when that incident happened, I was walking down the street at the University of Oregon, and I actually used that incident to prepare for a campus forum for staff and students, because every moment is a learning moment. So as I have transitioned to the University of Oklahoma, and looking at the curriculum and looking at what the former director did, but also what is ongoing right now for 4,000 incoming freshmen every year. For me, it's a great starting point for the student. The curriculum is designed in a way that, first of all, helps the students reflect on who they are. Like, who are you? What is your core? What is your identity? What are some of the intersections in your identity? So understanding, being aware of who you are, and in that process, also be aware of who the others around you are. What are their identities? And making students understand that whatever you identify as, that is who you are. And it's okay to be who you are. And it's also okay for others to be who they are. So understanding that, you know, I'm a Black person, I'm a woman, I'm a mother, I'm an employee, and I'm working next to Dr. John. So we may be different, but what are some of those intersections? How do I interact with him in a way that respects who he is, and how does he interact with me in a way that respects who I am? So we provide language for these students so that they have tools for communication. Because in this world of a diverse population, we have a lot of well-meaning people who try to be very helpful in the way they communicate. And then they realized, oh my God, the person gets really angry, and you really don't know why they are angry. I'll give you an example. When I came to the United States and I would speak English, of course my accent was really heavy, probably it's better now, but I don't worry about that. People used to tell me, oh my God, you speak English so well. And they wondered why I wasn't clapping for them. Like, oh, thank you for the compliment. You know, they wondered, why is that not a compliment? Because for me, that wasn't a compliment. So why would it be a compliment? Are you saying that you're surprised that I can actually speak English? So it's the little things. So you mean well, or people would come to me and want to touch my hair, and they think that's okay, which is not okay. Because you really don't, it is those cultural nuances. So understanding what are those nuances in these different populations, and what should you say, what should you not say, but what is the language, what is intercultural, competent, culturally competent language when you are talking to different people. And people understanding that you are just not one identity. So you have an LGBTQ person who can also be a person of color. You have a white person who could also be socioeconomic. Their socioeconomic class is low. They are probably from a rural area. So we help students understand what their intersections are, what language to use, but also we bring awareness on stereotypical threats and implicit bias, where you're really biased, not because you want to be, but because maybe that is how you have lived. You have always been in the rural area, you come to a campus of 30,000 students and you're in New York City for you. How do you navigate that? So it's about the tools, it's about the language, it's also understanding that we all have lived experiences that have shaped who we are, and how do we interact even if we never came from the same pot. I know people like saying, oh, it's a melting pot, or it's, you know, it doesn't have to be a melting pot. We could all be different, but we could understand how to interact, to live with each other. And that is how we create an inclusive campus, a welcoming campus, where students don't feel isolated or they don't feel like a fish out of water, but actually they feel they are part of a community. So even in doing the training, we are trying to build community among these students. We are trying to create a basis for understanding. We are trying to create some kind of cognitive empathy among them so that they don't have to always pull each other's hair if they don't understand each other, but they can actually listen. So I tell people, I don't go camping. They ask me, why don't you go camping? I look for firewood all my life, like to light a fire. I use kerosene lamp all of high school. Why would I now, when I can actually switch the light, why would I go camping? And I want people to understand where I'm coming from with that. So not that I can't afford it. Thank God now I can, but I don't want to because I want to forget that part of my life. So that is how you create understanding, respecting each other's lived experiences, learning from each other, welcoming each other, and in doing that, creating success pathways for every single student, no matter who they are, no matter where they come from.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Arungu. Chris, I have a question building on that. With your breadth of experience across 35 states, what other successful advocacy for diversity and inclusion initiatives can you share with us?
You know you switched up the question, but that's okay. I can live with that.
I just want to keep you on your toes.
I know you do. So what I was thinking of, combining advocacy and what Jane just talked about, I think one of the things that's interesting in terms of advocacy, going back to what I talked about before, is who doesn't get heard. So I want to switch to who we hire, okay? Because we are surrounded by people who were hired for the most part because they're dedicated to education and they really do believe that everybody can do it, right? You would agree with that? But one of the things that we don't frequently hire for, and the reason that a lot of voices don't get heard, is we don't hire people for cultural competence, for the skills and the knowledge that it takes to do the kind of listening and understanding so that I can not just hear what you say about how you're different, but understand why it's important, understand that difference makes a difference. And so one of the things we sometimes do is we fall into the idea that we're going to hire for diversity, and once we hire for diversity, we've hired Jane now, so the rest of us don't have to worry about it, you see, because she's got it. Of course, Jane can't be in every room, she can't be in every search committee, it doesn't matter because we've hired Jane and we got this covered. So one of the things I do around the country is I teach colleges and universities, and I also work in independent schools, how to actually hire for cultural competence, which means we stop asking questions like, why is diversity important? Why do you think we should include diversity at the institution? Because that's not going to tell you a damn thing about what somebody knows how to do. Instead, for every position, we look at that position and we say, what kinds of skills and knowledge and experience should we be looking for 21st century who's going to be in this position? And that's a requirement. So instead of asking what I said before, we start saying, if it's a faculty position, a teaching position, please give me 3 examples when you've changed your curriculum and pedagogy in order to deal with the diversity of your students. Explain, please, for each one of those examples, what the diversity you were dealing with was, what you changed, why you changed it, what you learned from that, how well it worked, and what you would bring here based on that information. That's a serious question. Very difficult to fake an answer to that question. I don't care what you tell me you believe in. I care about what you know how to do, what you've tried. If you tell me I've always been able to work with any diverse group and I've never ever had a problem, then I know you haven't done anything. Because frankly, we all have issues. And one of the reasons why advocacy is a problem on campuses is we keep hiring idiots, particularly at higher levels in the organization. So this morning I was on a national webinar talking to boards of trustees about how not to do this in independent schools. Stop hiring idiots, start hiring people that know what they're doing. Because what happens when we don't do this is we discourage people all over our institution who are trying to make a difference. They either leave physically or they leave psychologically. And the other thing that we don't take into consideration is when we do a really good job of this, when we ask excellent questions, when we really push candidates to tell us what you know how to do, even if somebody doesn't get the job, they go away and they say, that place is really serious about this. They really did. I mean, I didn't get the job, but, you know, I would recommend somebody try to hire there. So I have to tell a story out of school here about Jane. When she went through her interview, the phone interview. So I'm talking to Belinda, who's saying, we're interviewing Jane, we're interviewing Jane. Then I'm talking to Jane, who's calling me up and going, I'm going to the University of Oklahoma for this interview. I can't tell either one of them that I'm telling to the other one, right? So she comes back from the interview, and she calls me up and she says, the phone interview was 90 minutes long. It was the most exhausting thing I've ever been through. And now I'm committed. It was a great interview. She said, they're really serious. They actually mean what they're saying. You could not possibly have answered these questions well unless you really knew what you were doing. And so now I'm in. Now I will try for the job. And we forget that. We forget that one of the reasons that we can't sometimes attract is we haven't done a very good job basically letting people know we're serious about this.
Great. Thanks, Chris. So I'm going to shift gears here for a minute and bring up another topic that many of us know is on the federal radar, and that's the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA. We know that DACA has been in the news recently. There is significant confusion and fear across college campuses about proposed administrative changes and the impact these changes will likely have on our students, families, and our institutions of higher education. With the possible threat of deportation, students and their institutions, as we know, are facing serious challenges. So Jane, I want to throw this question your way. I know that you've done a lot of work in the past with DACA students. What were the issues? How did you support your DACA students?
Thank you. In 2014, at the University of Oregon, I was the director of the Center for Multicultural Academic Excellence, and I was working with a team of retention specialists, and the data kept coming through that we have a lot of undocumented students. And the question with me and my staff was, how are we going to support these students? Because we had lots of scholarships that they could not access because obviously they are not residents. So we had to be creative. How are we going to support them? That time, the issue of deportation and DACA being rescinded was not even on the radar. So what I did was I formed a team of faculty, students, and staff, and we formed the Dreamers Working Group. If you Google Dreamers Working Group at the UFO, you're going to find it there. We created a team of support system across the board because I realized this is a population nobody is talking about, and they're going to graduate or they're going to drop out of school, and what next? All of us now know that DACA has been rescinded. So, and our president has talked about immigration and immigration status as something that he's going to focus on. So I think the problem is if we do not support these 800,000 students who are able to receive permits to work, permits to get a job, then it is actually a national problem. It is not a problem just for those students and their families. It is your problem too, because we are talking about almost 1 million students, 1 million, most of them who have actually graduated and actually they are in the workforce. So my advocacy for this group and why I think all of us need to think about these special populations is because they are part of our communities. So if somebody was working and now after March 2018 they will not be able to work and they are your neighbor, you should be worried about that rather than actually that they are working. Because when you have a citizenry that is working, that is able to provide for their families, you actually have a safer community. So the issue we have now is we really don't know what is going to happen. Because 2018 of March, if their DACA was not renewed, for the next 2 years, they will not be able to work. They will not be able to receive a driver's license anymore. Their licenses are going to expire, so they won't be able to drive. So it's also going to affect some of your students who are adult learners. They cannot come to those evening classes. They cannot afford those computers to take online classes. They cannot feed their families. So it is going to impact all of us in different ways. So for me, as an advocate of DACA, I want everybody to know that it is their responsibility to call their congressmen and tell them to come up with a program that is going to support these young students or employees, because they are part of us. Deporting them is going to cost the United States $60 billion. So why would we spend that money asking people to leave? Why should we not spend that money building infrastructure for them so that they can become useful members of society? That it is better to have somebody have an education because their chances of becoming that is less. So I want us to be, I tell people I'm not a politician, but when it comes to this issue, I'm as political as it can be. I'm not afraid. The other thing is, for me as an international person, I came to here as an international student. If I were not fortunate enough to have received residency, I would be illegal, and I would have left, and probably I would not have been able to raise my kids or take them to good schools. So DACA is very, very important to all of us. Remember also that some of these students are actually breadwinners in their families because their mothers and fathers cannot work. Because DACA was only for those who are 16 in 2007, I think. So their mothers and their fathers cannot. They work under the table. So let us realize that is impacting more than the 800. It's impacting 11 million others. And deporting them is not the solution.
So, John, you might share what you are seeing as viable campus supports for DACA students.
Yeah, you know, I think state institutions have a challenge that private institutions don't have because of how they're interconnected into record keeping. At our institution, when the current administration started to ban people from countries, we created a mechanism, and if you go to the Northeastern website, you'll see links to how we support international students who might be affected by some of the bans. With regards to DACA, most of the private universities, and I just had a meeting last week with all the chief diversity officers in the greater Boston area, the challenge has been, you know, do we help the governments by assembling a list of names of our students that we know to be DACA students? And some of my colleagues have really struggled with that because they want to support students, but they don't want to make it easier for the government to find out who these students are. Because as private institutions, we can do certain things. Northeastern has its own police department. The local police usually get permission. They just don't show up on our campus. So we have some power and ability to do things that state schools don't have. But, you know, some of the things we're doing is how do we connect students with faculty. I've had several faculty come forward and say, I'm willing to take these kids in my home if worst comes to worst, and we have to shelter them off campus. And so, you know, our challenge is how do we support the students and not make it easier for the government to identify who they are, but also not make it feel like they can't leave the campus. Because I have seen a rise in fear among international students and students whose immigration status they feel can be questioned at any time. I had a student in my office last week who, you know, got caught up in what I would consider a minor transgression, but his whole fear is being deported. And so for a simple transgression on campus that would get him sent to student conduct, he's really been out of shape about being deported. And so I think that's our challenge. How do we reassure students that some of the things that they would normally do on campus won't lead to situations that find their status in jeopardy?
Great. So I'm going to throw out one more question to the panelists, and then we're going to open it up. In her book, Why Are All the Black Kids Still Sitting Together in the Cafeteria?, Arthur Beverly Daniel Tatum, PhD, a past president of Spelman College, which is an all-women's historically black college in Atlanta, Georgia, and she's also was the 2015 Women of Power Summit Legacy Award winner. And in her book, she addresses the new social context in which we find ourselves. She makes the point that enabling communication across racial and ethnic divides is essential, and employing purposeful strategies to accomplish this goal seems imperative. So with that sort of as context, the question I want to ask the panelists is this: how do we create campus environments where all groups feel included and respected? What do we do to keep students from feeling marginalized and isolated on our campuses? And maybe give an example. And I'll throw that out. Who wants to?
I'll go first.
Okay.
So, you know, some of the things that I've learned in my many years of doing this is that sometimes it takes by any means necessary. And so I do a lot of talks to students. I work a lot with the colleges in embedding diversity into the curriculum for the first year experience, for co-op. For those of you who don't know, Northeastern is really big on experiential education. So we have now developed diversity content for almost all our students going on a co-op. And one of the things we constantly reinforce is that this thing about diversity is connected to your success in a global economy. And we constantly reinforce to students that, if we heard from someone from Apple earlier today, if you're going to go work for Apple and you tell them, I don't want to work with the Chinese, they're not going to hire you. And so both at the student side and on the faculty side, we reinforce what are the things we're doing to drive home the message that it's soft skills, ability to work in teams, to work and manage people who are different from you, and all these other things that are critical to your success in any type of endeavor you're going to enter into when you leave school. And even with faculty, if you were to go back to your respective college, and I do all faculty at Northeastern who are new, whether they're tenure track or non-tenure track, spend an hour with me at an orientation about teaching in a diverse environment. And one of the first questions I ask, and I would encourage you to ask this of your faculty, is how many of you give group assignments? So how many of you who teach give group assignments in your class? A few of you do. How many of you pick the groups, and how many of you let the students pick the groups? What I've found is most people let the students pick the groups. What you will find happens is the students will pick their friends and the people they're comfortable with. That's not how the real world works. You know, we take a job and you are stuck with the people you ended up with, right? And so through the work we do with our faculty, we're trying to reinforce stop letting the students pick their group. Assign the groups, they're going to grumble, they're going to have someone who's not going to do their share of the work, but that's how real life is. And they're going to have to learn how to navigate that. And so some of that has started to pay off because we participate in some of the national surveys of students. And the most recent data we have for graduating seniors show that they find, compared to our peers, that their experience at Northeastern is more inclusive, they have a stronger sense of belonging, and racial tensions on our campus is half of what it is to most of the peer institutions that we compare ourselves to. But it's through a lot of the work we're doing in the classroom, working with faculty, a lot of the programs we hold on campus to make people aware of the importance of diversity, not just to feeling good and doing the right thing, but to your success when you leave school.
Thank you.
I think for me, one thing I've done, especially in the last 7 years, is as we welcome students from underrepresented groups, I like putting them together first and giving them a real pep talk, that it is okay to be who you are, that who you are is fine, and who somebody else is fine. And then we create spaces where these students interact with other majority students. And then one thing I did in the last few years is actually to invite community members, whether they're the Chamber of Commerce, bankers, principals, doctors, so that students in that interactive space can also see folks who are successful. So that if somebody had told you you can be that, you see actually somebody who is somebody, who has some kind of role in the community, who looks like you, who talks like you, who understands you, but also interacting with different folks who actually have some kind of intersections with your work. So it's not about only how we look, it's also about what we do and what we have in common. So I think students feel marginalized sometimes because they don't have a system or a transition system that's welcoming to them. College is complicated. Some of these students have lived only in their own communities. So when they come to a large campus, they feel isolated. They feel like they are alone. So creating spaces where they could interact with each other, with their own groups, but also between groups, and also bringing in mentors. Mentoring for me is huge. I always tell people I wanted to be a teacher because one of my teachers made me feel really good about myself. And I say, you know, I want to be Mrs., we used to call her Margaret Mary. I want to be Margaret Mary one day. So mentoring these students, making sure you're making a difference. Do we have any mentors in this room? All of you should be mentors. Mentor those who are coming into your institutions, but also provide and remove structural barriers. I want to tell everybody in this room, structural racism and discrimination is real, and it's based on what America believes, what is good and what is not good. So these students bring in those ideas to college. But we have to unlearn that. We have to make sure that we have systems that is supportive to them, whatever the barrier is. Can they drive to work? Is there childcare because maybe they are mothers? Do they have money for lunch? We have a lot of foster youth in the system, and even mothers who grew up as foster kids. So removing those structural barriers for them so that they don't feel alone. Making sure that they connect to somebody. I always told my students in the first 3 months, come back and tell me who you have connected to, who is a faculty member or a staff member, so that they feel like they have someone. These students are afraid to be alone. And once they get afraid to be alone, they get depressed, and the suicide rates have gone up. We can do something about that by removing those structural barriers for them, by creating success teams around them, by identifying what is it we are not providing and provide it, and if we can't, what else can we provide to mitigate those barriers?
Great. Yeah, thank you. Let's give our panelists a huge round of applause. And I think we have time for a few questions, so yes. Let's see who. Leah will take the mic and play Oprah for us.
Hi, David Wood from Stetson University in the greater Orlando, Florida area. And as you know, about almost a year and a half ago, we had a pretty tragic event in Orlando in our LGBTQ community. And a few things that we've learned from that is that we actually had students in our university and some of our fellow universities that had not come out because they did not feel safe in our community. And so my question is, what are your universities doing specifically for that community to make them feel more inclusive and a part of your community?
So Northeastern, you know, literally my first day at Northeastern, a group of law school students from the LGBT community showed up in my office, probably 20 of them, to make me aware that the Student Health Center services didn't cover services for transitioning students. And so I set out to make sure that some of the things that we take for granted or we think that our institution does, but we don't really know, which is part of that assessment, to find out where we were not being supportive. So Now we have over 100 gender-neutral bathrooms on our campus. You can actually find them on a digital map on my website from my office. You work with student housing to come up with gender-neutral rules for student housing. We have an LGBTQ resource center. We have a conference that we run that won a national award last summer through NACE, National Association of Colleges Employers, as the best diversity program, where we bring professionals from different industries to come to campus to meet with students to talk about identity-based questions and issues they may have. Because if you think about it, for some of us, if you have an identity that no one in your family shares, then who do you turn to for advice? And so that conference continues to expand. We had over 200 students from not only our institution, but from Greater Boston, because we've reached out to the other colleges. And so we continue to do programs and educational programs to make the community aware of the needs of our LGBT community, but we also do the things to support their success both on campus and in the workplace.
Oh, I just wanted to add something about what Dr. Jen has said. What happens on campuses also, in my previous institution, I'm well aware of this, is actually ally training. Making sure that we provide tools for folks to understand that we have this population, what language we use, but also creating bystander intervention so that they know how to act if they see a student or a staff member, there is some agitation or some mistreatment towards that. So that those who are trained receive decals, and you place that on your door. So a student walking in or a staff member walking in, they know you have received that training and you are an ally to that group. In addition, of course, to the resource centers, and I'm happy to say in Oregon, most schools are actually LGBT friendly. They win awards for that. But in other places, it could be different. But you could be that change maker and connect with somebody who can provide that training, and then make sure you have champions across campus, in faculty, in staff spaces, in student spaces, in student government, so that those students feel safe. The other thing that University of Oregon does is bring K through 12 students who have come out. They work with these young people, bring them on campus so that they start familiarizing themselves, familiarizing them with campus resources, so that if they are seniors and they want to come to college, they know this one will be an LGBT-friendly campus. It's never too early.
Great. Is there one last question? Okay, if not, what I want to say is keep the conversation going for the remainder of the conference. Reflect on these wonderful ideas and the food for thought that our panelists have provided today. I want to thank each of you for being here to be a part of this panel discussion. And if you would join me once again in thanking our three panelists.